I don't know why it always does that. Okay, so our audio is live. I need just a moment to restore these video feeds. There's a bit of a bug in the software that causes, at the moment of startup, total lockup of all cameras. So hopefully we can get those back without too much ado, and we will begin. This, of course, is the first episode in a new series called Cold Case Crowdsource Investigation, and I am delighted to have a crowdsourcer back with us in the flesh, Pepper Stanley.
Live.
Hello, Pepper.
Hey.
Lovely to have you, and thank you so much for coming out of the shadows. We've got the great one, Charles Ortel, with us via Skype today. Hello, Charles. How are you? Oh, no.
Thanks for having me on, and hi, Pepper.
There we go.
Charles, nice to be here.
Now, I need to kind of preemptively apologize to the audience because we are on very, very thin internet bandwidth here, and I'm hopeful that the broadcast is coming through to everyone. I've done everything that I can to try to tweak the bandwidth that we're sending out at and all that stuff. So hopefully things will go smoothly. If there's any problem, we'll record and upload later, but it looks like right now everything is okay. Now, Charles, this was a very important matter that I'm pleased that I was able to come here to join Pepper to cover, because people may remember the last time we saw Pepper Stanley, she helped us in an investigation into the strange death of Peter Smith. And of course, Peter Smith was the Republican political operative who was investigating the 33,000 missing Hillary Clinton emails. He was in touch with, of course, Charles Ortel. And Charles, you were one of the very last people on earth to speak with Peter, isn't that correct?
It's likely. I met Peter by telephone, frankly, never in person, in by August of 2015. And he was introduced to me by a prominent international figure, an American, and he was introduced to me as somebody who was a political expert in the practicing of politics. And that's an area that I've tried to stay very far away from. My undergraduate degree was in economics and politics, and I have a lifelong interest in history and politics as it evolves, but I'm not a partisan political type. And so this guy was introduced to me to be sort of a mentor, somebody who could help me understand the nuts and bolts of how politics worked. And he had been involved behind the scenes in Republican politics going way, way back. He was described to me as being a billionaire, something that it turned out he was not. But he was a very energetic person, a very polite person, a very experienced person, experienced in the ways of the world. And I don't know how many phone conversations and emails we might have shared over the course of nearly 2 years. But we were regularly in touch.
So it was many, many emails, correct? And phone calls.
Well, yeah, because what I would do, I think you've been the victim of this a little bit, each of you. When I am in an active research mode, I might circulate a lot of emails in a given day. And when he was alive and interested, I would copy him on many, many, many emails, and he would respond to some of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you've told me, Charles, you were quite surprised to hear that he committed suicide, allegedly, because he was very enthusiastic about the work that he was doing, and despite being 81 years old, he was pretty vigorous. He appeared to be in good health and quite active.
Yeah, so what had happened was we had talked a great deal, especially prior to the election of 2016. And I would say, I don't know how many months before the election, he began to be very interested in trying to find the missing Hillary Clinton emails, and specifically to try to find the emails that or the contents of what may have been on Uma Abedin and Anthony Weiner's computer. Now, while that's a project that sounds like it could actually yield a lot of very interesting information, it's off the base of what I was trying to do, what I have been trying to do with you, Jason, you, Pepper. I care about charity fraud. I'm less interested in the machinations of the political system. And so Peter would tell me what he was trying to do, and he would talk about also trying to help Michael Flynn, who he felt after the election had been given a poor deal. So I would take phone calls back and forth from him. We'd get caught up on what I was doing, and I'd listen to what he was doing. But what happened was in around May timeframe, and I don't have the dates in front of me, but May 2017 or so, Peter became acquainted with a Wall Street Journal reporter who he felt I should talk to, primarily to explain to that fellow what I was trying to get accomplished with our investigation of the Clinton Foundation. And so I followed up in May. So I don't have the date in front of me, but I followed up in May. I heard nothing from this reporter. And then, actually, Jason, the day I met you in person, the first time I met you,
Right.
When we were filming down at the World Trade Center, I got a call from this Wall Street Journal reporter saying that he was going to run with this story about what Peter Smith, this is, I guess, after Peter died, but what Peter Smith may have been up to.
And that's Shane Harris, right, Charles?
That's Shane, exactly. But prior to Peter's death, what happened was we had exchanged emails, I think, and then he had asked me to get in touch with him just to give him an update. And so I spoke to him on Saturday, the day before he died, at New York time, I want to say from memory, around 5 o'clock in the evening. And it was about, I actually went to Verizon and checked out exactly how long I was on the phone. From memory, I thought it was half an hour. Verizon says it was 26 minutes. And basically, what I wanted him to do was he was based in Chicago and said he had all these contacts in Chicago. And I wanted him to reach out to the Obama contacts that he had and explain to the people at the Obama Foundation in what serious trouble they were going to be if they didn't fix their articles of incorporation and get that Obama Foundation back on the proper path. And this was something that Peter Smith felt he could do because he felt he had one or two contacts who were trustees of the Obama Foundation. And we talked long and hard about that. And, he was very interested in doing that and getting that message across. Again, my concern in all this is I feel that the presidential records of we the people, whether they're Obamas or Clintons or the Bushes, these are records that have been bought and paid for. Actually, I suppose we borrowed to pay for them because we're so heavily in debt. But they need to be preserved in structures that people can use to study what actually happened in the course of these presidencies. And so, that's one of the things I like to get done here. And anyway, it was a very good conversation. I enjoyed it. And I was really excited. Peter seemed to be charged up. He said he did admit that he was having health problems and that he was out at the Mayo Clinic. We had a long discussion about that because, as it happens, my grandmother and her sister both worked at the Mayo Clinic briefly after they got out of college.
Wow.
And so, we chuckled about that. We were talking about, Chicago and this and that. And it was not the conversation of somebody, who was desperate. It was not the conversation of somebody who, was really depressed. It was somebody who was making plans, to get involved in a project that would take many weeks and months.
Right. It's interesting, Charles, you bring up the Mayo Clinic, and we've learned quite a few things just by coming here and walking in the footsteps, as it were. The hotel that we're in is the Aspen Suites Hotel, the very hotel where Peter was found dead and where he was, conceivably staying while he was doing this research. He was here. How long was he here for, Pepper?
He checked in on May 5th, and he never left, and he passed on May 14th.
Right. So this is the last place that he was.
That's
And
quite a while.
quite a while.
Yes, quite a
And
while.
what we've learned from being here, Charles, is most everyone, something like 90% or more of the people in the hotel, are either themselves receiving treatment at the Mayo Clinic or members of their family are. And so hotels in this area are generally economically priced and intended for longer stays. They cater towards people who are, making this their home for a time being. There's a kitchenette. There's a DVD library in the hotel. All of the staff members that we've spoken to have said it's rare for some. I mean, this is not exactly a resort town. It doesn't have all of the amenities you would expect from a business hotel. The internet is very poor. We've got about 1 megabit per second of internet. We've tested Sprint, AT&T, and Verizon. Very, very poor internet connection here. But we've learned a number of things about the policies of the hotel that make certain things about our investigation that we at one time might have thought were kind of on the sinister side. There are valid explanations for them. For instance, there was a question at one point about why his room would not have been cleaned on a Saturday, and there's this note right in the hotel room talking about, staying more than 7 days and having to schedule housekeeping services for Saturdays if you're going to stay. So that made a lot more sense to us after we had seen that. There was, of course, also, Pepper, the open-ended question of how did he get here? How did he get to Walmart? We speculated quite a bit about how an 81-year-old man might be able to carry a tank of helium. In my mind, I was picturing a tank similar in size and weight to propane. I haven't personally handled helium that much, but we discovered that there is a free shuttle bus offered by Walmart that comes to the hotel, and there are no receipts, there's no payments. It's got a regular schedule, and we had actually a very extensive conversation with the driver on the bus. We took that bus to Walmart, and the driver told us that you can actually dial this phone number here and call the shuttle bus to schedule service if you want to go there on Saturday, and that this is what Peter Smith would have had to do. Now, we did have the presence of mind to ask the driver if she had seen anyone come on the bus with a tank of helium, because that seems pretty unusual. And she told us that she's been driving that bus and that route for 7 years, and it was just her and another driver. We did have a chance to speak to that other driver. Neither of them recall seeing Peter Smith. We showed, the second driver, the man, he would have been driving on Saturday. He did not recognize a photo of Peter Smith, and he did not recall seeing anyone get on the bus with a tank of helium. Now, that doesn't mean it didn't happen, but we also went to Walmart. And people may recall we played that surveillance video that you got, Pepper. That was amazing. And we showed that to the manager of Walmart. He confirmed that is in fact consistent with what surveillance video at Walmart would look like. Charles, I've gotten a ton of emails from people who have speculated that surveillance video should have... I know what the problem is. I've been turning Pepper's audio down and it's mine that's clipping. There we go. So a lot of people have been speculating that the surveillance footage should have had time and date information on it, but the manager of Walmart confirmed that looked like surveillance footage from their store. He recognized an employee in the footage. That employee is no longer employed at that Walmart. It was an Asian gentleman who had the nickname Money. He didn't tell us his real name, but he said he went by the name Money and that he had relocated to a store in the cities. And of course, he's talking about the twin cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. But, as much as I feel like we've kind of dispelled some of our own, for lack of a better explanation, conspiracy theories about what might have happened to Walmart, I mean, it certainly seems like someone went there and someone did, in fact, purchase that helium.
There's a lot of questions that remain.
There's a lot of questions.
So we spoke to the chief police sergeant, and he was on the scene. He did the final report. And this was back on May 14th, over a year ago. So a lot of people have forgotten a lot of the information. Much time has passed. What we did discover is that they first did an investigation, and they looked at this as a simple suicide of an elderly gentleman that probably took his life for a reason. There might have been some health issues. They closed the case almost immediately until there was some new story that was breaking in the media about who Peter Smith was. And they didn't know that Peter Smith was the individual that broke open the Arkansas Bill Clinton story back in the early 80s about the womanizing. They didn't know that he was the central figure of this
Troopergate.
Troopergate, and the Russian collusion story that's underway right now. And so then they reopened the case again, and then they modified and answered questions that some still remain unanswered. They closed it again. And then it was handed over to the local field FBI. We haven't seen any of that information. But what the sergeant did say is there were issues which Jason and I brought up that he simply says, you have really good questions and we don't really have answers for that.
And to be fair, we're not accusing the Rochester
Not
police
at
of
all.
anything, but people need to realize that when you start to dig into this stuff, this is not New York City, this is not Los Angeles, this is not Chicago. This is a small town. There's going to be fewer officers on that police force, less money going to them, less resources, less capability.
Right.
So it's...
The good thing, a lot of things that we had questions about, and not being conspiracists, but just being theorists looking at what was going on in the media at the same time that the passage was occurring. And we'll talk about the media and more into the detail, because that seems to be the bigger story here.
Yes.
And that's why we're actually sitting here today, because we want to understand the correlation between Peter's passing, if it was a suicide or something else, but what the story in the media had to do with that.
Right. Now, before we get into all those details, Charles, I want to share with everyone just some video footage that we captured here in the hotel. We were able to actually go to the room that Peter stayed in. And Charles, I know you don't care for this type of speculation, but Quinn Michaels would definitely be fascinated to know that Peter stayed in room 316. And we went to room 316. Pepper actually tried to book that room for her stay, but oddly, she was not allowed. When we checked in yesterday evening, that note was crossed off, wasn't it? So someone had seen that we had specifically requested that room for Pepper and denied giving it to her. There's really nothing remarkable about this hotel room. We went in there while it was being cleaned and prepared by the housekeeping staff, and they were quite polite, but obviously unwilling to speak with us about this matter because that's not their role here, and obviously they're very concerned about keeping their jobs, not speaking out of turn, not expressing a personal opinion while they're working as employees of this hotel and representatives of this company. It was interesting to note that the door, which suffered substantial damage during the incident, hasn't been replaced. It's just been repaired. So that was kind of interesting, and we recorded that video. So again, the notion of coming here and doing some firsthand, on-the-ground investigating was definitely interesting and revealed some interesting data.
Other things we learned which had inconsistencies in our original investigation was the key coding, and there were several different entry points that didn't add up to the final investigation, and so that actually opened the second investigation, which is when the 911 call came in from the front desk. It didn't correspond at all to the key coding.
The time
the
that
timing,
the door was activated.
So I think the time of the call to the 911 officer was 10:54 on that the Sunday morning, and the police indicated it was like 1 p.m. So there was different discrepancies.
But you had learned from calling the company that makes the locks.
We called, and this is an older system. Makes sense that they don't. If you don't refresh it every day, there might be timing inaccuracies or discrepancies. But we did learn something that was interesting, and the police department also said there were 4 cards given that were guest cards, but there was one Peter. So when we checked in, he got 2 cards, I got 2 cards. So Peter likely had 2 cards. If he lost a card, the question is, does he get another card or 2 cards? Because we had a question is, was he alone or was a guest with him?
Yeah, because the questions that remain unanswered are, how did he get here from Illinois? Did he fly? Did he rent a car? If he flew, this is pretty far from the airport. It took about an hour to drive here. How did he get here? Would he take a taxi for an hour? Maybe. Charles, did you have any information about Peter's driving ability at 81? Was he still driving himself?
I have no idea. I mean, as a guest, though, I don't know how far a drive it would be from Chicago to where you are, but
Pretty
when
far.
you consider transfer and waiting and all that kind of stuff, it'd probably be a lot smarter to drive.
From Chicago to here?
But the family did not
As a
know he
guest,
was here, first of all. And second of all, there was no vehicle here.
Yeah, right. I mean, if he had driven and died, his car would be here, someone would have to remove it. None of that. Likewise, if there were a rental car... Sorry?
Wasn't he pictured with somebody at the checkout?
Well,
my recollection is that some of the evidence that we have is he was actually seen with somebody, I thought, at the Walmart checkout. Am I misremembering that?
There, according to the Walmart sales clerk today and the manager and then the police, he was alone. There was a clerk that was closing the aisle, which was not uncommon, at 12:58 on a Saturday afternoon, and they claimed that was the sales clerk and no, friend or someone that had befriended Peter.
Yeah. There were people around him, of course, but it wasn't clear that there was someone with him. And the people in the hotel didn't tell us that they saw anyone with him either. But then again, if it was someone, if there was some sort of secretive relationship, whether that's to do with research or whatever, very often when we're dealing with these things, everybody says, Clinton body count. There's some degree of secrecy that the researchers might want to surround themselves with. So it's possible that someone could have come and gone in the hotel without necessarily being right there with Peter. That would certainly explain having 4 cards. I don't understand why one person would need 4 cards, and all 4 of the cards were used to access the door at different times, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So that's interesting. The really most interesting aspect of it, Charles, however, is the media campaign that surrounded all this. And we haven't really before now, as Crowdsource the Truth, we haven't really looked at that at all. And Pepper's brought all this to my attention, and it's astounding. Why don't you take us through some of that,
Sure.
Pepper?
So what got me most interested in this, Charles, is I'm in that space. I'm in the marketing advertising space. And when the story originally broke, I didn't think much of Peter's passing until I started to look at the correlation between what I consider a brilliant advertising marketing campaign surrounding a Russian collusion story, looking for a main cast, including a central figure named Peter Smith. And they built an entire narrative on it, which we will show you, which is called the Tick, Tick, Tick marketing and advertising campaign. And it began around the time when, if you look at May of 2017, there was a number of concurrent things occurring. So number one, we know that was about the time that Comey was released, and at the inspiration of Rod Rosenstein, Trump fired him. We also know that Mueller was coming on board. We also know that in May of around May 16th, Ben Wittes, as I pronounce it, who is James Comey's dear friend, began to post information in the media, including his own Twitter site. And we will start to show you the unfolding of what became the Tick, Tick, Tick Boom campaign. And it was an enticement every day or every few days to inform the audience that there was something big that was about to explode. And what happened is the story kept building until June 29th. Now remember, over on this side, we have a man that has passed. May 14th, there was a Peter Smith passing. Over here, on May 16th, Ben Wittes starts to launch a brilliant And I call it a visual mnemonic, a sonic mnemonic, where it's this cannon that he uses, and he basically shoots everything from whipped cream to a can of Dr. Pepper. And so his story is building over here. So there's these concurrent paths. The story over here of Russian collusion and search for emails. And over here, there's this building up of something big is about to blow. So then what happens is this goes through, consecutive Twitter banwitties, it's unfolding. And then on June 29th, what we see is it was 5:14 p.m. Eastern Time. The Wall Street Journal breaks a story. Shane Harris, our same Shane Harris. And the story is about collusion, Russian connection, an on-the-record conversation he had with a Republican opportunist who was looking to tie his 33,000 email search to General Flynn and to the Russian state. And the beauty of that story is that it went viral. It was magnificent across a multiple media platform, brilliantly executed.
Let me pause you for a second, Pepper, because it's important that we remind the audience that Benjamin Wittes is the same journalist that James Comey was leaking this information to.
Dear friend, yes.
Okay, so
Yep.
he's an important part of all this, and it's also important that we start to just think about the different players, how they're connected, how they're interoperating together.
Correct. Very
Okay.
good point.
So do we want to, why don't I show this quick segment here from the Lawfare blog? Do we want to show that? Are we ready for that?
We're not ready for that. So
Okay.
let's just hold this. Okay,
Sure.
so the boom campaign explodes when, why don't you pull up the Wall Street Journal posting that was done at 5:14. And that was the boom. Okay, so now they've launched the boom. The boom then leads to, if you look almost within 10 seconds to 10 minutes, Rachel Maddow, Ben Wittes, and Shane Harris go to their personal Twitter accounts and they tweet on this Wall Street Journal posted story. And the story then, if it was just a standalone story and I'm Rachel Maddow, how would I know that that's about to occur? If I'm Ben Wittes and I'm maybe not personal friends or I'm busy that afternoon, how would I have known to exactly at that moment of time to post my response? Unless if this is all, pre-planned, unless this is all fully integrated with a bigger media message. So then you look at this, okay, so we've got the posting up now, and this is the beginning of the boom. Basically now over the next 3 to 5 to maybe 12 months, you're going to start to see this amongst many platforms. These are just the key players. So
it's really a sophisticated transmedia marketing campaign that kicks off, or I should say kicks into high gear, this Russian hacking, Russian collusion idea.
And you could call this fake news, and the reason we call this fake news is we'll get into some of this, and it gets back to, Charles, the correspondence that you had with Peter that basically contradict Shane Harris's story. And so why don't we go to the next is the can we pull up a bit of Rachel's story?
Absolutely. We've got Rachel Maddow here, ready to go. Now, Charles, I apologize. Due to the limited network bandwidth, you're not going to be able to, I don't think you're going to be able to see or hear this, but...
That's quite all right.
Okay, so let's play this.
How is the
tonight, the Wall Street Journal
sound
reports.
quality on this?
Shane Harris reports.
You're good.
That
Both
on
of
that
you-
very weekend, on Labor Day weekend
Both
last
of you come
year,
in sort of garbly.
a
I
longtime
just wanna make sure the
Republican
sound
opposition
quality is good.
research guy, a
You sound
wealthy
good.
Chicago
Give us a minute.
Republican
We're
named
playing
Peter
Rachel
Smith,
Maddow.
who had a history in the Arkansas-based efforts to come up with scandalous dirt on Bill Clinton in the 90s. Peter Smith, a committed Republican oppo guy. Over the Labor Day weekend this past year, according to the Wall Street Journal, he, quote, assembled a group of technology experts, lawyers, and a Russian-speaking investigator based in Europe to try to acquire emails that the group theorized might have been stolen from the private server that Hillary Clinton used as Secretary of State.
So Rachel Maddow is talking about how Peter Smith put together a team that included a Russian-speaking individual in Europe, and that he was after these emails. According to Rachel Maddow, he heard the fake news that Russia hacked and then decided to go after Russians. But in looking at emails that Peter shared with you, Charles, he seemed to directly contradict this, didn't he?
I didn't catch that, Jason. What?
Can I interject
Yes,
one thing?
please.
There's a second piece of this, which is really our boom. And that's when Shane Harris is now interviewed, and he talks about his conversation that he has had with Peter 10 days before Peter died. And I'll tell you how that happened in a minute, why they even were having a conversation.
So we'll play this again, and then we'll recap it so that Charles can follow. I really apologize, Charles. I did not anticipate such poor internet here.
Don't worry.
I'm Benjamin Wittes, and this is the Lawfare Podcast, Special Edition, June 29th, 2017. The Wall Street Journal this afternoon dropped a story entitled GOP Operatives Sought Clinton Emails from Hackers Implied a Connection to Flynn. It's by Shane Harris, whom Lawfare readers know well, and it provides the first detailed evidence, not conclusive evidence, but evidence of coordination between people associated with the Trump presidential campaign and people they believed to be Russian hackers.
Now, the point here, and we kind of jumped a little bit, but let's talk about this. So Rachel Maddow is currently live interviewing Shane Harris on a story that she had just learned about a few hours earlier. So she pulls I guess she finds out on the Wall Street Journal posting. She quickly calls, they prep a big show for him. They've got a wonderful 9 p.m. show in Eastern Time. Simultaneously, live on Lawfare blog, is Shane Harris also interviewing with Ben Wittes, who is Comey's friend. And it's like, how's that even possible?
Well, obviously,
they're all okay. Now let's go back to the second part. While they're both, Shane is two people at two different recording studios. Go back to the second part of this interview where Rachel's now letting Shane tell the story about the conversation with Peter.
Okay.
Peter Smith and these people who he assembled, they apparently read the news that Democratic servers had been hacked by the Russians, and they extrapolated. They basically mounted an effort to try to get Hillary Clinton's private server emails off the Russians, because they thought they must have hacked those too. Quote, in an interview with the Journal, Mr. Smith said he and his colleagues found 5 groups of hackers who claimed to possess Hillary Clinton's deleted emails, including 2 groups he determined were Russians. Quote, we knew the people who had these were probably around the Russian government.
Oop. Sorry about that. So the part with Shane, right.
Okay, so now Shane talks about the conversation, and the question is, how did Shane even get introduced to Peter? And why would Peter have called Shane? Well, what we've learned is there's a young fellow that was a researcher that worked on behalf of Peter Smith. His name is Jonathan Safran. And Jonathan was a great support, digital support, political support researcher for Peter, and they both were in Chicago at the time. In fact, Chicago is where Jonathan ended up in law school, and he befriended several of the politicians on both sides of the party. Jonathan was a Republican, Peter was a Republican, but Jonathan met people like Scott Curran, who was his professor at his university. And Scott, ironically, was at one time, not that much earlier, the general counsel for the Clinton Foundation. So Jonathan was extremely connected in that space. And what Jonathan received was a LinkedIn invite from a Wall Street Journal reporter named Shane Harris saying, I'd like to meet this person you know. Could you make an introduction to this man named Peter Smith? So Peter was then informed to reach out to Shane. And so that's how the invite came. But if you listen to the next conversation, the interview with Rachel, it's contrary to some of that. And maybe we've lost it.
Yeah, there's a little, hang on, give me a moment
That's
and I'll
all right.
bring it up. And
the conversation that Shane says, as his recollection is, this brief conversation he has with Peter is on the record, and in the emails that Charles, you received, Peter clearly says it was an off-the-record conversation. The other piece that was interesting, if you want to interject, please do.
There is breaking news from the Wall Street Journal tonight that is...
Let me just get it to the spot where we want.
The second piece of this is that there was extreme clarity on Shane's part that the emails that you had said that there was no Russian state involvement. But in this conversation, it is clear that Shane is tying the Trump administration with the Russian state and the Russian government.
Let me play that now.
Okay.
Boom. Joining us now is Shane Harris, national security senior writer for the Wall Street Journal. Mr. Harris, congratulations on this tonight. I really appreciate you making time to help us through it.
Thanks, Rachel. Glad to be here.
Let me just ask you first if I got anything wrong in the way that I explained that.
No, you got it right.
Okay. I have to ask you first about a small but very human detail here, which is that Peter Smith, who did an interview for this story, he died in May, you say about 10 days after you spoke to him. Can I just ask you about the circumstances of the interview and the circumstances of his death and that part of it?
Sure. Well, oddly enough, Peter Smith actually reached out to me. He apparently learned that I was looking around and interested in him, which is true. My knowledge of what he was involved in predated my first contact with him, and reached out to me, and we had a conversation about what he was doing, which was fairly extensive, and obviously he's quoted in the story. And it was at that point that when we suspended that conversation that I continued doing reporting and assumed in this case, perhaps incorrectly, that I would have the chance to go back and discuss this further with Peter Smith, but obviously he died about 10 days after I spoke with him. So it was on the record. He reached out to me. He was in no way ashamed of what he had done. He was actually quite proud of it and fervently believed that these emails would eventually surface. He really believed that he was at the end, as he described it. He thought that he was at nearly the last chapter of a long saga, and that soon these emails would come to light, and that he...
So, Charles, what was that part?
Okay, that's the part where he refers, and I've got the transcript, where
Right.
he says, we are on the record. He makes it very clear. And then he said, he reached out to me.
Right. So the points that Mr. Harris are trying to get across here are, he's saying, and the thing is, he's doing this in a very clever way, Charles, because by Shane Harris contacting Jonathan Safran and then saying, hey, Jonathan, have Peter Smith contact me, it's true that Peter Smith reached out to him. Mm-hmm. But Peter Smith had no idea who this guy was until he prompted Peter's assistant to contact him. So this gives him the plausible deniability to come on the Rachel Maddow show and say, hey, I don't know, this guy contacted me. But what I think he's saying that seems to be incorrect is this notion that Peter knew that it was on the record and that Peter said that these emails came from Russians. We've seen emails that Peter sent to you where he states very clearly that they are not from any Russian, any nation state at all, and not from people linked to the Russian government. What do you say about that, Charles?
Right. Well, so if I may, Jason, what I think we should consider doing is framing it this way. If we look, and I'll get right to I'll answer your question, but I want to just give a little context.
Sure.
If we think back to the biggest news of this week, which was the Helsinki meeting, and the immediate hysteria, which is Donald Trump, is fine with sitting down with somebody who's a murderous thug. He had in that press conference, some idiot from one of the big news sources actually more or less say to President Putin, don't the people around you who disagree with you end up dead? We have the Skripal incident, the initial incident, now the subsequent one, were on the basis of no verified independent evidence that anybody outside England can review. Right away we nearly go to DEFCON 5 around the West does, that is, with Russia, over this incident. Yet, in contrast, here we have in Peter Smith a man who admittedly had, it turns out, grave financial difficulties. So those may have been a motive for him to commit suicide. There could be a whole angle there that I actually know nothing about. And that's a box that deserves to be on the table. Experts who can get into those records need to check all that stuff out. But in addition to that, we know that Peter Smith, by August of 2016, was very much involved, with the efforts that culminated in the New York Police Department getting access to that laptop. We know he was pushing with others to expose all those emails. And we know that was something that, had those emails come to the fore, would have guaranteed Donald Trump's election by an even bigger margin of victory, in my opinion. So it's likely to assume that Peter Strzok and James Comey and the small group of people who were trying to get Hillary Clinton selected president in 2016, after she couldn't even become nominated in 2008, that group was doing their level best to sit on these emails. And we know that because, there's now evidence in the file that, Jason, you've had on various shows of how long it took to get actually that information evaluated. I think the search warrant was ultimately sworn out, wasn't it October 27th, 2016? So all along in this period, Peter Smith was a thorn in the side to the Hillary Clinton camp, and he persisted. He didn't even give up after Donald Trump won. He was still trying to get those emails. There have to be FBI records of people who were monitoring what Peter and his group were doing. They were knocking around. They were trying to interact with Michael Flynn. This was a big issue right after Trump was declared the victor, but before he was inaugurated. I've got to believe that somebody, if the FBI were run by a truly honest and an unbiased, objective person, which it is not under Christopher Wray, we can say that for certain given what happened today out in Aspen. There have to be exhaustive records in the file of somebody checking up on what Peter Smith was doing. And what Peter Smith was uncovering likely poses, even now, a grave threat to Comey, to the people who missed, all this stuff way back when, going back before 2016. And all these people, I would argue, have motives to do Peter Smith harm. And, I'm not saying I know what happened, but I am saying that I don't think the evidence has been fully exposed and run to ground. And certainly the people who were looking after this matter in May 2017 and shortly thereafter, didn't McCabe replace Comey?
Yeah.
For many months, wasn't it? Through like August of 2007?
Or acting director or whatever he was.
Can I interject two things? So,
yeah.
Charles, you're right. This is really curious. But if you look at the emails that you and the correspondence you were having with Peter, you received one on November 8th, which was the morning of the election. And his conversation, Peter's quotes were, the FBI D.C. office raided the New York field office last night and took the Huma Abedin, the Anthony Weiner, the Hillary, all the information, assuming, I presume that they thought she would win. So all that evidence was gone.
I think it's important that we remind everyone, including Charles, that the police report even says that Peter Smith, in the business center of this very hotel, which is directly adjacent to the front desk, was for hours printing things out, and to the extent that he had to get more paper. Now, no laptop was found.
No materials were found.
No materials, no prints, no laptop. So I find it strange that someone who is researching emails, someone who is employing experts in cybersecurity, Charles, I think you've made it very well known, your Luddite tendencies. Even you travel everywhere with a laptop. Does it seem reasonable that Peter Smith would come and stay in a hotel for weeks in the midst of all this research and rely on the public computer downstairs, which incidentally, when we searched those computers, we found numerous extraneous files that people had left there, all were related to medical results, applying for different loans and how to pay for your medical stuff and everything to do with medical treatment. I don't think it's reasonable to assume that Peter Smith would use a public computer for such sensitive research.
Well, I agree with you. I agree. Also, remember Peter Smith's background. He had financial interests at one time into various data companies, that provided, information services. I mean, so
Yes.
The other thing I would mention to you is, and without giving out his address, you will note in the communications back and forth between me and Peter that he used various email addresses. Some were standard. One was a company. I don't want to give them out.
Right.
But later on, as we got into 2017, he in late 16, he began to use an encrypted email address.
Yes.
And somebody who would do that is pretty unlikely to use a common computer. Right. Someone who's learned enough about sending emails that are encrypted is unlikely to go onto one of these computers in a hotel
where people are leaving their medical records.
Which we found on the computer.
Lift the password.
Yeah.
The other piece we just showed an audio blog that was concurrent with the Rachel Maddow show. And so on the June 29th, concurrent airing was the Rachel show over here on MSNBC. Lawfare blog had Ben Wittes and the Matt Tate. And Matt Tate.
Let's talk about him for a minute.
An interesting character who we discovered now works at Lawfare blog, which is where the recent FBI general counsel just was hired, James Baker, which was about a month ago.
Yeah.
And that's the Brookings Institute, right? So the Brookings Institute is where Matt is, but where was Matt before, Jason?
Well, he worked at GCHQ, Charles. This guy, Matt Tate, also worked at Google Project Zero. Now, Google Project Zero is something that a lot of people haven't heard about. It's basically a collection of elite hackers that Google has hired ostensibly to seek out exploits in any digital system anywhere. So if it's your iPhone, if it's your Microsoft Xbox, your Cisco router, your Intel chip, whatever it is, these guys are seeking out weak points in digital systems, and their stated purpose is to alert the manufacturers of those systems to make the internet a safer place and be this nice, squishy place where everybody can be safe and good. Frankly, Charles, to me, it sounds like Eric Schmidt's personal elite hacker force that can just go hack into whatever the hell they want.
But they did do good work with Tavis Ormley.
Right. Tavis Ormley did alert Cloudflare, but that was a strange alert. Tavis Ormley, if I'm not mistaken, alerted the world that Cloudflare had a weakness in it that exposed the DNC data. Cloudflare was a cloud data contractor to the DNC that was handling their data, and instead of contacting them in a sort of
private,
quiet sort of way,
IT to IT,
hey,
Silicon Valley
you've got a
to
little
Silicon
problem
Valley.
Here. He did it in a tweet, if I'm not mistaken,
To the entire IT world.
to everyone.
February 17th, or I believe it was, in 2017.
Well, so Jason, on the GCHQ thing, that's a
Yes.
very important thing.
Yeah.
And I think what we're seeing through this whole long saga, and you and I have talked to Jason on air many times about this. When the Clintons or the Obamas accuse you of something, especially the Clintons, they're accusing you of a crime or misdeed that they themselves are carrying out to a fare thee well. So when they start accusing the Trump team of collusion with a foreign power, I believe it's because the Obama administration and elements around the Obama administration were actively colluding, at least with the English, with elements of the English government, likely GCHQ, which is the equivalent of NSA over there, to illegally spy not simply on the Trump campaign, but likely going back during the primaries to spy on, all the potential candidates. And beyond that, we don't know to what degree GCHQ and operatives within GCHQ, and frankly, operatives inside our government were using these great hacking and spying tools to ferret out information of great commercial value to potential political donors to both parties. That, I think, is the essence of what is causing the current fervor, where we see, over this Helsinki thing, we're now in a new level of animus of, Obama speaking out in Johannesburg behind a banner that has up there his foundation, Obama.org, which we've put him on notice, Jason, many times. It's an illegal fraud, and you cannot be marketing the way he's marketing. But he's up there in a foreign power throwing major league shade at the sitting president of the United States. While we speak right now, Sally Yates was just on a special with MSNBC. She's amping it up. Susan Rice is amping it up. Comey's saying you got to vote Democratic, this guy who was supposedly a Republican. Ray is saying that, Mueller's thing is not a witch hunt. This is going into overdrive. And I think the reason it's going into overdrive is so many people inside our government had to know that what Obama had been doing and his people had been doing while he was president, likely even going back well before 15, 16, maybe even affecting the 2012 election, was harnessing the apparatus of our state, working in league with friendly powers like the UK, who have a lot more to gain from Russia and the United States being at loggerheads, alongside our defense establishment, and has a lot more to gain with us being at loggerheads, because that way they sell many more systems around the world.
Right.
That, I think, may have been what is going on here, and that may explain a lot, all these mysteries, that are double plus triple secret that we common American people, the voters, don't have a right to understand.
And, Charles, I'd like to remind
Peter,
you, sorry to interrupt.
One thing I remember well about Peter is he has an inquiring mind, had an inquiring mind. He wasn't going to take BS for an answer. Right. And as you see, he was persistent.
Absolutely.
So how close did Peter get to finding out the real truth?
One thing I wanted to touch on.
We need to get his laptop.
Yes,
we
absolutely.
We need to know. I mean, the public has a right to know what was really going on here. And for Americans across the political spectrum, the Bernie Sanders supporters, there, Jason, the Bernie Sanders supporters, have a lot in common with the Rand Paul wing of the Republican, independent, libertarian people. And I think most Americans would recoil in horror to understand just how much money is spent to all these nefarious purposes by ungovernable security services that are acting in concert with a great country, the UK, but it's a small country.
Well, and I want to remind, Charles, everyone who's watching, that it was just last week that Bill Binney said to me that GCHQ and NSA are, in fact, one in the same, that their integration is so tight that they should be viewed essentially as the same operation, where the two designations are almost a front to allow British authorities to take action through the American actors that they cannot do domestically, and likewise for America to be able to utilize GCHQ, as we've seen them with Christopher Steele, etc., to take action against Americans that would be illegal or unconstitutional for the CIA or the NSA to do itself. What do you want to say?
This is a really interesting point to counterpoint to you. And Peter wasn't going to stop, and he was, a bulldog with regard to finding the truth. This is about seeking the truth, and God bless him. But what I did find surprising in one of the emails he was corresponding with you was that he was clear that it wasn't Russian tied to a government or Russian state. It was in his email. He also was very clear that it could have been, there were 5, he never says the word 5, but there were several teams that not only had access to the emails, but had already given them to WikiLeaks.
Right.
So Julian Assange had the emails way before, but Julian was sitting on them because Amal Clooney was associated with him in some representation.
She was a lawyer for WikiLeaks.
And with regard to that, she was also a huge supporter of Hillary Clinton. So there became this huge conflict within that.
And the bomb for me today that you revealed was that, I don't know if you knew this, Charles, but Amal Clooney actually fought with WikiLeaks to prevent them from releasing the Podesta emails, and then when they released them, she resigned as their lawyer. I don't know if people know that.
So there was a lot of behind-the-scenes story, and I guess what we're asking for is to re-review the Peter Smith story.
Right.
And he may have ill health. He may have had financial pressures. There may have been a group that we have heard of that was trying to financially destroy him and his family.
Right.
We have no knowledge of that at this moment because he's no longer here.
And we did reach out to some of his family members today. You
did.
spoke with his daughter briefly
did.
yesterday. We had hoped to have a follow-up conversation today. That unfortunately didn't happen. We did have a rather lengthy conversation with a sergeant at the local police department here, and it was quite clear that they're essentially done with this. I mean, you know, we learned a lot of things at Walmart today, but I don't want people to think that we're satisfied with what went on in Walmart. There's still a number of bizarre questions that remain unanswered. Why were 2 pliers needed? How did 2 canisters of helium arrive here at the hotel, as seen in the police evidence photographs in part 2 of the strange death of Peter Smith, when he only purchased 1 at the Walmart? Did the guy drive all over town purchasing helium? I should also add that after the last episode of The Strange Death of Peter Smith, I received an email from someone who had access to Walmart information that showed the inventory of that Walmart. It only had 1 helium canister in stock. Oh, and I forgot to play the video. We were in Walmart. I actually lifted the canister with 1 hand.
Oh, yeah.
So it seems like someone could have carried that, but I got to imagine an 80-year-old guy walking onto a hotel shuttle with 2 canisters of helium. You're going to remember that if you're the bus driver, no?
Yeah.
Hard to say.
So the other pieces of
Hard to
this,
say.
we're missing his laptop. So, which is curious, and the family apparently never got it back. But the other part of this is the evening before Peter died, we believe someone may have hacked his Twitter account because there was some very disturbing information on his final tweet.
That's gone now.
And that's been removed. And then there was also Jonathan Safran, who was, remember the young assistant. He disclosed during an investigation that an old Twitter account that he hadn't used for a long time had been hacked, and there was one message on it. It was tied to Russia. So there's some curious and curiouser things going on here, and we're just asking for someone to look at it. If Peter passed, he passed, and he maybe chose to take his life, but the surround is now the bigger question.
Right. You know, the other thing that was interesting, Charles, we went to the archive.org, Internet Archive, which, you know, you can sometimes go back and see some of these old deleted tweets, and I found it very strange that Peter Smith's Twitter page was in fact archived in the Wayback Machine. I don't know if you've done too much with that, but it's an interesting resource. It might be a little difficult for me to access while we're live streaming here, but people can see that there were really only 2 times, even though Peter joined Twitter, I think in 2014, there are only these 2 occasions on June 29th, 2018, and 2017, and July 2nd, 2017. Only 2 snapshots taken of that Twitter account, and it makes me very curious as to who runs this Internet Archive. Is it possible to manipulate it? Are people able to delete snapshots and put snapshots there? I mean, certainly this is a web page. It's driven by software, and I think we all know that someone creates a web page, someone can modify it. The question is, who's running this, and should we trust it, or is it being used to cover information?
Well, I do know, and I
Wait
did
a
some.
second, Jason.
I'm sorry, Charles. Go ahead.
Sorry, excuse me, but I mean, Peter was dead on those 2 days.
Well, he wouldn't be the one doing the snapshots. That's what I mean. Whoever is running archive.org has now preserved snapshots of his Twitter account that reflect what is there on the Twitter account now. But what Pepper is telling us is that there were tweets in Russian on there previously that could have been put there by someone.
They weren't in the Russian language. They were referring to a connection to Russia.
Sorry.
That's
Right.
okay. I wasn't clear.
Yeah.
But Jonathan didn't know where that came from.
I should also mention that we've tried quite aggressively to contact Jonathan Safran, and he's oddly inaccessible. He had a workplace listed on LinkedIn that we contacted, and most of the people there never heard of him. We did speak to someone in the law department who said he was an intern there last summer, but he had left. We called a tutoring company that was ostensibly his current employer. He was not on their corporate records. He was not known to anyone in any of the cities that Facebook or LinkedIn said that he was living in. So he's a guy in his 20s or young 30s. I would think that type of person would be sort of more on top of keeping their LinkedIn page up to date because they'd be looking for work and looking to build their career. So it just seemed rather conspicuous that this guy was so difficult to find.
And on the final investigative report, all the cell phones we had access to that were not redacted, his is no longer in working order. And several.
Can I see those numbers for a second?
Several others too.
I know Charles hates this, but if Quinn is watching, I've
Oh,
got
I don't know. Should we do that?
They're inactive numbers.
Okay.
So Peter Smith's number.
This one is.
You shouldn't give his number out.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would just say.
It's inactive if people dial it, but.
Well, I don't know if we should.
All right, I won't give it out, but.
And what we want to do, Charles, is be really respectful to Peter's family and to his life. He has a wonderful legacy. He was a wonderful man. He did some remarkable things. And so I'm only hoping that in respect for him that we could get to the bottom of this and let his legacy be something that perhaps in his death we can do some remarkable difference to get to the truth.
How do we feel about me describing Mr. Safran's inactive cell phone number, redacting the area code?
I wouldn't give that out.
We won't do it. I'll just discuss it with Quinn.
Yeah.
The numbers are very strange to me.
They're very much along Quinn's
Yes.
formula.
And when I call it, it doesn't ring, it doesn't answer,
No, it's
it
dead.
doesn't do anything. It's very odd. Very
it's no
odd.
longer
And we called
working.
another number for him that picked up and hung up right away. So something's going on there. I don't know what. Charles, I appreciate you taking the time. I know it's getting late there in New York and late here as well. Was there anything else, Pepper, that you wanted to share with us right
No,
now?
I just think we need to get to the center of what was in the emails that we can't have access to because we don't have his laptop. And I've called on Congress members to see if they could reevaluate that. There's some things that we have discovered through your relationship that would never have been shared with the public that we can now share, and that it's just in complete contradiction to some of the reports that have been created by a very small core team of well-marketed individuals.
And
So,
well coordinated
very
as
much
well.
so.
Charles, anything else you'd like to share with us at the time?
Just that we continue to make progress on the Clinton Foundation matter, and lots of progress around the world. I wouldn't be making long-term travel plans if I were any member of the Clinton Foundation Board of Trustees, senior executives, big donors. Don't count on making travel plans.
It always delights me to hear you say that kind of thing, Charles. And thank you very much for taking the time out of your day today to join us for this. We're going to hopefully learn more about the strange death of Peter Smith. There's still so many unanswered questions. I want to thank both of you for being with us, and I want to thank everybody for watching. I will be back tomorrow with an exclusive Field McConnell interview that I think everybody's going to want to see. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Good
Have a
night.
great night.